Hi, good afternoon. First of all, welcome. Thank you for making your way down the very long end of the hallway to Harbor F. We're thrilled to have you here. My name is Charlie Radman, and I am the Global Head of Education for HP. And I have to tell you, I've been to ASU+GSV many years now. This is the very first year that HP is actually a sponsor of ASU+GSV, which I'm completely thrilled about. And as part of that sponsorship, we are allowed to have a panel. And they asked me, what would you like to do a panel on? Well, there's something I'm very passionate about, and that's teachers. And so I was like, I can think of a panel immediately. Could I find the right people to be on this panel? And I have to tell you, I cannot be more honored, could not be more thrilled at the people I was able to assemble for you today. And I'm sure you're going to be thrilled to meet these guys and learn from their expertise. So with that, I don't want to talk a lot at the beginning. We're going to jump into questions pretty quickly. What I would like each of you to do, and I'm going to start Mr. Trucano down at the end, please give a quick introduction of who you are, where you work, and then tell us about a teacher that impacted your life.
All right, thanks, Charlie. Thanks, everyone. So I'm Mike Trucano. I'm a visiting fellow at the Brookings Institution. It's a think tank in Washington, D.C. I'm on sabbatical leave from the World Bank, where I led the technology and education stuff, did that for about 25 years, working all around the world in some very challenging circumstances. So thrilled to be here. Yeah, a teacher that influenced me. I mean, pretty much every teacher influenced me, other than in ways good and bad, perhaps. But I think, my 7th grade teacher, I remember walking into a class, and it was kind of a rough, frankly, it was a rough classroom, rough school, and turned in my first assignment, and he said, okay, are you interested in this? And he said, okay, you can do this work, but I've got some other work for you, because I think there's something else that I think you'll like, and I think we can work together on. And just the fact that, in this environment, he singled me out, and he singled many other people out, Mr. Kelly. When you're in 7th grade, it's a tough time. And I really appreciate it. And I think I went on to be a lit major and among other things in college, and I attribute it in part to Mr. Kelly.
Jeremy.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Roschelle. I'm a learning sciences researcher, and I lead up the research group at Digital Promise, which is a nonprofit based in Silicon Valley and in Washington, D.C. And I'd love to share with you a favorite teacher from college, Gene Bamberger. Gene Bamberger, well, I went to school at MIT, where I was kind of a computer science major, but I loved music. I still love music. Music's a big part of my life. And Gene was a music teacher, and at MIT in that time, there was the Logo group. Do some of you know the Logo programming language? Are we still like a few nods for Logo? Kids programming language based on the AI language Lisp. And so Gene had this crazy idea that she could teach music appreciation using Logo. And it completely blew my mind, because when I thought of music appreciation, what I thought of is like spinning dusty records and a professor saying, now listen to this. This is what's really great about this piece. Check out this and look at the... No, that's not what we did in this class. What the technology enabled us to do is to become creators of music. And we would play a little bit of music, and we would say, how would we make something like that? We didn't have to know music notation. We didn't know how to play an instrument. But it was constructivist music appreciation, appreciating music by making some. And that just blew my mind, and that started me on my path to wanting to become a learning scientist and do what I do.
Cool. My name is Michael Jabbour. You can call me MJ. It's good to be here with you folks. I am the Chief Innovation Officer for Microsoft Education, former CIO, CTO for various New York City agencies like the Department of Education. My, most influential teacher was in college. I was in a dual program for a medical program studying integrative medicine, so both Chinese and allopathic medicine. And after the first semester, I was like, I'm done. I was like, my brain only has one flip, and it's very difficult to maintain both medical systems at the same time. And one of the teachers, this may seem very old school, pre-AI, but he said, listen, MJ, we need to slow it down a little bit. He took my textbooks, literally ripped them at the seam, and gave me one chapter from each in what they used to have, 3-ring binders. My kids don't even know what those are. And just got me through through the first, I would say, couple months of transitioning to taking small bites of what was a very difficult dual curriculum in 2 different languages. And it's the only reason why I was able to sustain 7 years of that mess. But I really credit him with seeing that I was able to get through that, the path to doing that, and taking a somewhat unconventional approach to ensuring that I was able to take it in bite sizes. And I could give you several examples of just really special teachers that have guided me along the way. But I think it really was those teachers were able to see in me my potential and not let anything stop them from finding a way to manifest it.
I'm Keith Krueger, CEO of CoSN, and CoSN's a national nonprofit. We've been around for a little over 30 years, and I've been running it for almost all those 30 years. We represent kind of the heads of technology in school districts, CIOs, CTOs, people like what MJ used to do when he was at New York City. We try to think through from a systems perspective issues like equity, privacy of data, new things like artificial intelligence. I love your question about what teacher has made a big impact, and we've already heard from junior high to graduate school to medical school. I'll go back to high school. It was my first week of high school, and I was trying to be invisible, and a teacher, Kurt Graham, tapped me on the shoulder and said, I think you'd be really good at debate. And he said, I think you'll like it. They take a policy issue, we argue about it, and really it's kind of launched me on my career path for what I do today.
Thank you. So the reason I asked that question and started with that question is really because if you think about your own careers as you went through school, there was probably at least one teacher that got you, right? There was at least one teacher that understood you, no matter how weird you are. And by the way, we are all very weird, right, in our own special way. But there was that one teacher, or maybe there was a handful of teachers who changed the course of your life. But this is going to be a big challenge because now UNESCO is predicting that there's going to be a global teacher shortage of 44 million teachers by 2030. It's 5.5 years away. So 5.5 years away, we're going to be down 44 million teachers. 50% of those are to replace teachers who are in the classroom right at this moment, and there's nobody to come in to replace them when they leave. It's a crisis. And so we're going to talk about how technology today can help with the crisis short term as well as long term, and then I have an ask of you guys if you want to help. And so you're going to hear a little bit about that as well today. So Mike, let me start with you. First question. In your role at Brookings and also your former role or from leave at the World Bank, you talk to a lot of ministers of education around the world. What are they talking about when you talk to them about this crisis, or are they even talking about the crisis?
So thanks, Charlie. I mean, they're absolutely talking about it. And the situation in sub-Saharan Africa is particularly acute, has been for a long time, certainly since the AIDS crisis in the late 1980s. But, I mean, what do you do? What do you do if you have kids and you have no teachers in their school? What do you do if you have populations that are moving from rural areas to cities and maybe you can find buildings, but you can't find teachers to put in there? And in the rural communities around your country, you can't convince teachers to go there, and the teachers you do convince to go there are younger teachers, have less support, they don't have peer networks to support them. What do you do in that case? And increasingly they say, well, business as usual just isn't working. We need business unusual in some case. That means can technology play a role? Can technology play a role in our environment? It's one thing if we're talking about, rural Uruguay in South America where they have decent connectivity and is a certain level of affluence. It's another thing if you're talking about rural Papua New Guinea, which is a country in Southeast Asia near Australia, where you have things are so remote that you have communities, villages in the valley that speak a different language than they do on the top of the hill, and in between they speak a kind of Creole between them. And how do you support teachers going into these environments? They don't know and they're looking for help.
So Keith, in your role in the U.S., I'm sure you're talking with a lot of school districts, right? A lot of CTOs, superintendents. They're probably, cybersecurity's up there, AI. Everything's AI all the time these days, right? We're all thinking about that. Where do teachers lie in that priority?
Well, we do a driving K-12 innovation study looking at kind of what are the key problems that technology might address in K-12. In fact, HP's been a lead sponsor for that for 15 years. And for the last 3 years, we ask a group of global experts, about 2/3 are from the US or North America, but the other third are from other countries around the world. And for the last 3 years, the number one hurdle that these experts have identified has been the teacher, the lack of teachers, and actually it isn't just teachers. We could say educators, because there's principal shortages, there's superintendent shortages, there's IT professionals. It's hard to keep and retain people who are running technology in schools. So it's a systemic problem, and I think there's a reason why that hurdle appeared 3 years ago. Obviously, the pandemic changed and added a lot of stress to the system, and there's all kinds of reasons for that, but being underappreciated, feeling mental wellness. And the reason that I think it's a great question to start with, because I think for technology leaders, and I'll include everyone in this room, we tend to start by talking with the technology. And I think that's flipping it the wrong way. What's the problem we're trying to solve? Technology is neither inherently good or bad. We could insert the word book or pen, or whatever in the sentence. There are good books, there are bad books, but what is the problem we're trying to solve? What's the hurdle we're trying to overcome? And so I think it's a great way of framing at this innovation summit, how do we use technology to overcome that problem of a lot of teachers, principals, superintendents, heads of IT leaving the field or feeling burnt out or wanting to? What can we do that makes their jobs better?
So this is a perfect tee-up, by the way. Great job. I didn't pay him to do that, by the way. Perfect tee-up for the question to Jeremy. So Jeremy, you spent the last 2 days over at the AIR Show. You work over, obviously, at Digital Promise. How is technology going to actually improve what the teachers are doing?
Thanks for the question. Just thinking the state, and I'm thinking about the US because that's where I have the most experience. Digital Promise is an organization. It has a League of Innovative Schools. League of Innovative Schools is 150 districts. And so we get a lot of feedback from the field. So I just want to give you a little sweep of what we've been seeing, which is, I would say, pre-pandemic, there was a lot going on with adoption of technology. It was going well, but it wasn't universally spread. Coming out of the pandemic, just tremendous burnout with technology from teachers. We are hearing from our superintendents who are really great leaders with technology. It's the League of Innovative Schools with Digital Promise. This is what they do. They lead with technology. And they're saying big contingents of teachers, parents, students want to throw the stuff in the closet and go back to the chalkboard. So that's where we were. I think an interesting thing with the advent of AI is it's brought back some enthusiasm for our lives as teachers could be better. It's the first tool I've seen come along in a long time where teachers say, hey, wait a second, this could help me. And I think, I'm a researcher. I've studied particularly math education, what's effective in math education. Whenever I've found an efficacious technology for math education, it was never that the technology alone produced that effect. There was always a program of teacher professional development that accompanied it. There was always classroom change in that system of teacher, student, and technology. There was always, so we know it works. It has to involve the teacher. Really glad to see the enthusiasm teachers have to make it more productive for them. So I'm going to echo what Keith said. Generative AI looks like a good productivity tool. And if we want to solve this global problem, well, I don't know about the places you work, but in the US, we have to make the job more attractive. We have to be able to retain teachers. We have to be able to retain teachers of color. And it's challenging to be a teacher still. And so any way we can use this technology to make teachers' job better, that's really a priority right now.
Well, and clearly with 50% of the teachers wanting to leave, right? We see this in the US all the time, right? It's on the news. NEA does a study, says 60% of teachers want to leave before the end of the year. Well, that's a lot, right? If we lost 60% of our teachers in the US, they want to leave before the end of the year, that would be a tragedy, right? I'm sure this is on the minds of Microsoft. I get a chance to work with you guys all the time. You know, I'm thrilled that, you know, you're one of our primary partners. When I think about the work that you guys are doing at Microsoft, specifically, how do you guys look at AI in this teacher crisis? And, you know, what is your feeling on the role that it could maybe help?
Sure. So I guess just bringing a little bit of color and context from my personal experience at the DOE, because when I went into a million-plus child system, first of all, no one is ever prepared for that. It is extremely dramatic. On the technology side, where you have 1,800 schools and 90,000 teachers, yes. That's kind of one part of this. The second is that of those over a million children, 73% are socioeconomically vulnerable or in some form of poverty, and there are close to 100,000 of those children that rotate through homelessness. And so there are more kids in New York City that are experiencing homelessness than there are people in almost every city in the US. And one of the things that struck me personally, and then I'll explain kind of the Microsoft position on it, is that there is a perception that when you go into those environments, that there's some sort of glass ceiling that if a teacher tries hard enough, or if there's enough force that you can break through some sort of barrier. Well, I can confirm for you that that is not correct. It is closer to a lead ceiling than it is a glass ceiling. And you know, when I look at the fact that whether they're graduating or they're not graduating, and you've got 70 to 75% of students that are illiterate, I actually thought that was a made-up statistic before I went into the DOE, and then was like, wait a minute. So on the Microsoft side of things, we really are looking at three primary areas. One is just based on all of our field conversations throughout the country. One is hyper-personalization at scale. How can we ensure that content is deliverable in the language, culture, and at the level of the student and also the teacher? Second is efficiencies, so looking at creating rubric and creating quizzes and content and making the job easier so that we can retain teachers in a system, especially in a harder system. And third is preparing our students for the future, because that has already changed. Even at Microsoft, no one sent me a letter saying, oh, by the way, your job changed a year and a half ago. No one. The closest thing that I got to that was reading Satya's financial statement not long ago, that we are no longer a PC on every desk company, and we're no longer a cloud company. Hello, good morning. We are an AI company. So I can guarantee you that those teachers never got a letter in the mail saying, oh, by the way, your whole job has changed. And you know, my wife told me to do professional development this past September for our kids' schools. And there are many more people than I expected to come, but one of the things that hit me the hardest was that the teachers said that this time for them was COVID 2.0. They didn't have the tools, they don't have the technology, they don't have the training, they don't have the administrative support, and the students are running them over. And so when I think of what equity and accessibility and all these ideas are in education, and what a teacher is now required to deliver, it is very different than it was a year or 2 years ago. And so on the Microsoft side, you know, we're focusing on what Copilot actually means. What does it mean to work with an AI? And I do think that was a very happy marketing accident, because I would be afraid if it was just autopilot.
So Jeremy, I'm going to follow back up with you. You've worked on the Department of Education's National Education Technology Plan. AI has obviously been a big part of that, right? We saw that kind of be published a few months ago. We're hearing amazing statistics like teachers today spend 3 to 4 hours creating a lesson. AI is going to do it for them in 20 minutes. Is it real?
You know, I've spent the last couple days over at AIR Show checking out how real things are. And I've played with generating lesson plans in math, which is my area of expertise. You know, there's a ways to go to when you look at what is produced by one of these generators. It can get you started. And the best, we do hear from educators in the field. For example, I'm thinking of one now in New York State, and they were trying to integrate more data science, more computer science into their math lessons. And actually, they found it really useful to get ideas, but they were not finished lesson plans coming out of things, missing tons of details. One I'll point out is if you're a really great math teacher, you know how to ask questions that stimulate a good discussion of concepts. You know how to get students talking to each other. You won't find any of those details in these things. I'll just end this little thing with just something to think about, that AI can only produce what's statistically close to what it was trained on, and I don't have any evidence that it's been trained on the process a classroom goes through of learning. It's being trained on the artifacts that pop out of the classroom or that are done in student work. So it has no basis to know the details of that flow of an experience, of an activity. And so, of course, it's not the greatest guidance for how to enact a classroom activity right now. So I try to steer down the middle, and I think there's a lot of promise, but we have to be careful that we're not there yet.
So last year, Mike, here at ASU+GSV, Bill Gates was on the stage and made the bold claim that AI was going to replace teachers. By the way, it's the second time I saw Bill Gates ever booed in my entire life. A large boo, by the way. But you and I have talked to ministers of education. What do you think? You think it's AI going to replace teachers?
I mean, so AI is not going to replace teachers. I mean, the cliche, I don't know if it's a cliche yet, is that teachers who know how to use AI are going to replace teachers who don't. At some point in time, that will be the case. Do some education systems, ministries, maybe ministers, secretaries of education, would they like it if AI replaced teachers? I think the answer, unfortunately, in some cases is actually yes. Yeah, I have talked to ministers who said, well, we don't have teachers in schools, or we have poorly supported teachers. And once kids leave the classroom, of course, who are their teachers? Are their peers? Are their parents? It would be great if we can have something teacher-like to support them, and we think AI is maybe a tool that we can use for that. But also, the AI doesn't strike. We get economies of scale quickly. Wouldn't that be great if we can assign to AI many of the things that we assign to teachers now? Because if we don't, what are our other options? So I've heard that unfortunately repeated in many education systems around the world. I mean, to me, education is a fundamental human endeavor. Yeah, there's no getting around that. But I think there's a real potential worry. I have the digital divide has long been about rich kids get the tech stuff and the poor kids don't. We could have a case where the poor kids get the tech and the rich kids get the tech and the people. Which means they get the technology and they get the teachers. And that is a future that I worry about. And I think some of the commercial imperatives and the fact that where there just aren't teachers or aren't sufficient number of teachers. I mean, I work in some places where classrooms are 80 kids to a class, 100 kids to a class. The teacher's 18. She just got her, secondary school degree, 6 months ago. So can AI make a useful impact in that classroom? Yes, absolutely. And I mean, God willing, we need that help. But I think it's going to be an interesting road. But I do think much of the rhetoric is around automation. How can we make teachers' lives easier by they do something and let's just cut down the number of hours? And I think my worry about that is well, if they're more efficient, then maybe they'll just be asked by administrators to do more of that stuff. There's no reason why they'll say, okay, you can use this time, well, maybe to have some time with your family. Teachers are overworked in most places, or to do other types of enrichment for yourself, or to work more closely with students. But it could be that they spend more time with the technology. And that's a worry I have as well.
This past week, we had our national conference, and we released some preliminary data about, we do an annual survey of CIOs, CTOs, and school districts of what their major concerns are about, and this year we asked about AI. And the bottom least concern was that it would replace teachers. The biggest concern was that teachers weren't quite ready, and actually cyber attacks. Again, that's our audience that cares about that. But I also think when we ask them what the biggest opportunity of AI would be, productivity was the number one, and individualizing learning was number two. I think there's some language problems here about using the term productivity, because school districts are not a profit-making organization. They're not looking to return to shareholders' profit. But I think what it would be better to say, is there a way to save time for teachers? Time is a huge, and for the system. So for your panel on teachers, how do we make it more productive, the way they grade papers, or the way they do whatever it is that they're doing, making lesson planning or whatever. I think there's a whole nother piece around productivity for the school system, making bus schedules, cafeteria, student schedules that have big opportunities for actual money and savings and time and things like that.
Yeah, just to, Michael, to challenge you a bit on the teachers and humans issue, because right now we're in that situation today where you've got kids that have teachers and technology, and then you have kids that have nothing. And I saw this firsthand with the pandemic, right? 1 million children, 600,000 had no device and no internet when the pandemic started. One of the most innovative cities, like I would say, probably in the world. And so that's kind of one thing that's floating in my brain. The second is that when I talk to my own 18-year-old about certain topics, like he bugs me about the craziest things. Free will versus predetermination, hidden variables, the role of angular momentum in medicine, like, please leave me alone. But I can tell you that AI just does a better job. You know, I know enough to validate what it's teaching and how it's teaching it. But I think having these tools will enable an entire generation of people that had nothing. And I hear you on the distribution of humans, but I wonder if maybe like the term teacher is too limiting.
Yeah, and I would not disagree with anything you said there, Mike. And I mean, Keith said technology is neither positive or negative. I would add the Melvin Kranzberg's addendum to that, nor is it neutral. Yeah, so in COVID, what we saw is that kids didn't have access to connectivity, they didn't have access to devices, but the more pernicious, or as pernicious thing that was happening is they didn't have access to people who could help them with their learning with technology and not. And that, I mean, that sort of digital divide, I mean, maybe part of that can be addressed, ameliorated through the use of more intelligent agents and those kind of things, but then the people to support students and the people to support teachers as they figure out how to do this stuff, because unfortunately the history of technology and education for the most part is adding on an additional thing you need to do, an additional thing to do. In enlightened or in very well-run institutions, yeah, it can take pressures off teachers, it can save them time, but in dysfunctional organizations, it adds an additional element of chaos, and if we're not careful, I mean, I think we all agree that chaotic systems certainly don't need any more chaos.
But do you really think, Mike, that if teachers are relieved of some of the more administrative things of grading or whatever, that they'd actually be asked to do more grading? I think there is some. The things that we're talking about are actually things that teachers actually kind of control.
Yeah, so I mean, that's maybe a theoretical worry, but I mean, so when Khan Academy was introduced in Brazil, yeah, introduced all these tools that, you know, people think about the videos, but the whole back end for teachers to give information about each kid and where they are, and teachers were saying, you've got to be kidding me, I've got to know the strength and weakness of every kid now. I've got to spend time that I didn't spend before because this technology is actually prompting me to respond. And it's giving me a whole new set of responsibilities that I'm not well prepared for. Maybe 3 years, 5 years down the line, that actually saves them time. And in fact, maybe it makes them better teachers. But I do worry about the fact that there can be additional burdens placed on, and
That's
where
a system in place.
System in place, yeah, and
As opposed to
where
individual.
they're doing something. I mean, there are things that you can measure when you do them digitally. Walking around the classroom, helping students, those aren't measurable in the way that other things are measurable. And as we have more, measurement and evaluation by metric, that is a worry that I have in some circumstances. And maybe it's not a U.S. worry. Maybe it's more of a worry in other places I've worked around the world, but it is a worry.
Oh,
Yeah, no, the only thing I want to just quick comment is not in agreement or disagreement with anyone. We are seeing at Microsoft very different trends in the other than U.S. population and U.S. populations. I just wanted to call that out.
Can you say more?
One is the availability of internet, right? Two would be the availability of humans to do that, the work of teaching, training, tutoring, mentoring, and so many of those roles are just simply missing. Unrelated to even devices, power, and other things.
Where I was going to go a little bit is, I think when you look at long-term evaluations of technology and education, you mentioned this in your warm-up comments to us, there's this tendency to make these broad generalizations, like, it doesn't work at all, it's terrible. And I think the reality of what evaluation research tends to show is each technology finds some niches in which it's particularly advantageous, and others where it's not. And I think right now, because generative AI seems so powerful, it seems like a universal solvent. But I wonder if there aren't particular problems. So to take us to the global one, I think literacy might be a place where we might see some real advantages, and it might not be so much about conventional teachers in classrooms, but in helping parents work with their children to learn how to read. And the kind of advantages I can imagine are making high quality content available in the language that's appropriate. There's just like the resource, but there's some very nice things being done listening to kids read and helping them in supportive ways and modeling that. And so I wonder if we pick a problem, maybe there's a middle ground between it's going to be awful and it's going to be great.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound like a doomer. I mean, this is the most exciting thing that's happened in tech and education for me in 30 years, yeah? And there's two types of innovation, yeah? One is you do what you did before more cheaply or more quickly or for more people, yeah? And that's really oftentimes about automation and achieving economies of scale and cost savings. And the other thing is you can do something you couldn't do before. And thinking about what can we potentially do now, or can we soon do to help support teachers that we couldn't do before with all this generative AI stuff that's happening. And think about, so if you're in a classroom with 20 kids or 40 kids or 60 kids or 80 kids, and you want them to interact with each other, yeah, you give them a small assignment and you say, discuss this. As a teacher, you kind of look, I mean, when I was in the classroom, how did I handle, I had 50 kids in my classroom. How would I handle that? Well, not very well, yeah? It's mainly just about being a cop and just making sure things didn't go off the rails. But if we had some way, and tools being developed, to have an AI alongside two students as they have some sort of discussion with prompts, and then as a way to record everything that happened and provide a quick summary to those students that then I could then look at as a teacher and make some maybe general observations or judgments about where the class was discussing a certain, that's doing something to aid and support and extend what a teacher can do, not just automating what she did before because she couldn't do that before. So I'm really excited about the AI as co-pilot, if you will, in the classroom and outside the classroom in ways that haven't been possible before.
So I've been thinking of, the Gartner hype cycle. And I was at the Gartner Symposium, and they, in the K-12 and higher ed section, and they said, we're at the peak of the Gartner hype cycle right now, that all things are going to be amazing and wonderful. And that means very quickly we're going to go to the valley of all things are bad and never did anything. But what, of course, with the hype cycle you want to look for is the long tail, which you don't really recognize that how things fundamentally changed as you look back. But I've been wondering, and I'd love if anyone else thinks this, it seems like we're simultaneously with AI at both the peak of the peak and the valley at exactly the same time. You have the doomsday, it's going to be biased, it's going to be, or it's the best thing since it's industrial revolution and whatever.
So, I mean, I have some strong feelings about that, but I don't think that we've even started to climb. We are nowhere near the peak based on what I'm seeing.
Well, it's hype.
Yeah, not the peak even of the hype cycle, right? I think generally speaking, yes, we see this disillusionment that occurs within a relatively short period of time, but there are so many tools that have not even yet been released due to the election that we really haven't even started to climb. We are nowhere near the peak, and so I think when we're thinking about what is really next for us as in terms of evaluating how we feel about these tools, we really need to get a more comprehensive idea of what the tools actually can do. So Jeremy was mentioning before about mathematical reasoning, for example. Just in this past couple of weeks, they've put out research that LLMs now can do regression on their own. They've now been able to do visual spatial reasoning on their own, neither of which we've coded for, trained them for, we've given them any material to assume that they even needed that. And so these are language calculators that are doing fairly sophisticated levels of reasoning, and they're just getting started. So I kind of wonder where Gartner is and how they're plotting that, knowing that they don't know.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, Keith, and I'm sure you heard this at your conference, it's not really the gloom at the bottom, but I think people got savvy in your community about privacy, data security, cyber security, cyberbullying. Yeah. A set of problems like I hear from educators when we're out there as Digital Promise talking to them that they were burned a little bit by promises of social media and some promises of personalized learning. And they're looking at this wave of adoption in a different way. And there are some that are more doomster, but there are a lot that I want both. I want the innovation, and I want the responsibility. And I don't want them separately. I want responsible innovation.
I want guidelines. I want to have a little playground about innovation, and I want
a sandbox.
A sandbox.
Yep.
I have to say, by the way, as a moderator, these guys are amazing.
Well, what do you?
I haven't had to say anything for about 10 minutes now, and I'm as fascinated as you are listening to these guys.
So
Charlie, so what do you think?
What do you think?
Keith and I have the same idea.
I agree. Actually, it's hard to say this, but I agree with both Keith and MJ in a way. I do think that we are certainly living a hype bubble today, right? Everything is AI all the time. And just like last year at ASU+GSV, I have to tell you, I left here believing two things simultaneously. One, AI was going to solve all the world's problems, and we were all going to be sitting on a beach drinking Mai Tais within 6 months. Or it was going to be the complete apocalyptic disaster that was going to destroy humankind as we knew it. If you listened last year to the opening presentation by the president of the Western Governors University, he said that AI was fundamentally going to change the DNA of humans. That up until this point, humans have been problem solvers. We've always been trying to solve a problem. And now we're going to move away from being a problem solver to being an inquisitor. We're going to ask a bunch of questions. And that may be a slight difference. You're like, but I'm asking a question to solve a problem. Yeah, but then you're going to take the answer the machine gives you and you move on. Or you may ask a separate question, but you're not approaching the problem the same way. And he believed that it was going to dramatically change the DNA of what it means to be a human. That scared the crap out of me. I'll just be honest with you. Sorry for the language, but it did. But I believe simultaneously that, yes, we are at the high and the low. I also believe, having been privy to see some of the amazing things that folks like Microsoft and others are working on, we have yet to even begin to see what is coming. So I think this bubble is going to continue to grow and grow and grow. Now, when does it pop? I don't think we know. Let me jump into a next question because I want to make sure we don't run out of time, and I want to give you guys a chance to ask questions if you guys want as well. One last question. So UNESCO has said, and OECD released a report last year that says basically technology is not great for education, right? In fact, in some ways, they believe that technology is actually bad for education. How do we change the impression for teachers that technology is actually going to improve their lives this time, and it's not an empty promise like maybe they thought it was in the past? That's just an open question to anybody.
I mean, I would be concerned also if someone told me that the purpose of this tool was just to take the job of all teachers. Stanford just released a report yesterday, and it's like 500 pages, so I clearly have not caught up, but the education section I did read, and one of the things you'll notice is that the vast majority of publications related to AI in education across any other sector. That was one thing I took away. But if you're a teacher and you think that this tool is there just to take your job, then I think that you will have a negative impression of what this tool is there to do, especially if we're now introducing bottom line thinking to the educational system. I don't think that that's in any way the intention, and I think we need to clarify that. In addition to looking at the most important document in every organization on planet Earth, the job description. And so if we don't know, I mean, literally entire governments hang on those documents, if you think of the civil service community. And so when we are looking at this from an educator standpoint, an administrator standpoint, we really need to dig deep and understand what our role is in the co-pilot scenario as opposed to the autopilot scenario, and see how people's opinions change longitudinally.
I think that's great advice. But, you know, and the likelihood in K-12 that teachers are going to be replaced, it's not just about learning. Teachers are also teaching kids to live life and to be human, and that's just a wrong assumption, I think.
I think, you know, your question was about how will teachers know if this is actually going to make their lives easier. I actually think that's really easy. I think we need teachers in the loop, and they'll know by how sincere we are and how much resource we put behind involving them. And it'll become really clear to them if their role is just to purchase the thing and use it, or they're being asked to be part of the design. And at every level, we could elaborate, but I think sincerity about really listening to teachers will make it clear to them right away. And I think companies need to be thinking about that. How are you really moving beyond like training the teachers or educating them, whatever you're doing, to really involving them in what this next wave means?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that was just said. I mean, how about I say ditto? Yeah, to finish it up.
All right, so we have about 4 minutes. Any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
Yes, so there's a huge adoption problem, and there's always been technology adoption problem, but this is very serious. There's a pressure, and how do you guys, like each of you, probably differently address that upskilling and reskilling, and can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so the idea is how do you addressing that, gap in upskilling the teachers, and maybe training more new teachers effectively, and so basically, what are you guys doing about that?
So Jeremy actually just referenced that when he was talking in terms of being able to delegate to the tool. In our Microsoft Work Trends Index, we show that over 70% of people are willing to delegate if the tool works, especially if they're included in the design process for how they can use the tool, how the tool will be built. And so, I think the willingness to delegate is one key area that we need to look at for particular tasks. In terms of skilling, I also want to caution one thing from what I'm hearing across the country, which is that normally when you would hear cross-skilling and upskilling, I'm hearing organizations now talk about downskilling because they have people that are highly trained that don't want to actually gain skills and tools that will help them co-pilot. And so, at Microsoft, we've been launching promptathons and other ways to deal with the cultural elements of being able to work human and machine together. And it's a cultural issue more than it is a technical issue, I would say.
Yeah, and I would say, the providing usage models that teachers can understand quickly and see that are relevant to the way they work as a bridge to getting them involved in the technology is useful, one. Two is to provide supportive environments for experimentation and play and not looking at punitive rules. I think first, what happened when ChatGPT came out? Everybody banned it. Yeah, not everybody, lots of people banned it in Australia, they banned it in Finland, they banned it in all sorts of places, yeah? And then they said, wait a minute, maybe it's actually useful. And there wasn't, in most cases, a rush to formulating strict policies and guidance and rules about the use. And I worry that whenever something new is introduced, we say, okay, how is this going to impact things negatively? And we immediately jump and put in place regimes and protocols and rules that can punish teachers who are willing to experiment, who are willing to learn. And that group, that core group of teachers that are willing to be out there first, they're atypical. They're, not representative of the big mass of teachers in the bell curve, but finding out ways to support them and enable them, because they become, in many cases, champions. They become reference points. They become leaders in the use. And that's the history of instructional technology use in schools, I think, starting with the cohort of teachers and moving out and beyond.
Well, and I would say it's important for training, right? Professional development training is absolutely key, and it's amazing that for an industry who is so knowledgeable about how to teach for students, don't take that same knowledge for how to teach their teachers, right? We talk about scaffolding for students. We don't talk about scaffolding for teachers. We talk about setting guardrails for students. We don't set guardrails for teachers. Why do we not do the same thing for teachers to make sure they're successful with the use of technology or whatever new thing that they take on that we would do for a student? Why do we not treat them in some regards like they are a student, which they are when they're learning something brand new? So that is the only way to actually truly be successful. We have, unfortunately, run out of time, and I know that they've asked me to make sure we end on time. So really quick, if you do have questions, we are available. You can come talk to us. They do need to get the room ready for the next session, but we will be in the hallway. If you would like to help, this is the last bit. This is very important for HP, so this is part of our corporate citizenship goal. We have two goals. One, improve education outcomes for 150 million people, for 100 million people by 2025. That goal has been achieved, but we're still counting towards it. The second one, which is more important, is to accelerate digital equity, including and specifically focused on teachers, for 150 million by 2030. We can only do that with the help of others. If you would like to help and be part of that solution, be part of trying to help address this global teacher crisis, we would love to welcome you into the fold. It's a coalition that's going to bring this together, and we would love to have you part of it. And so with that, we thank you. Thank you for listening to us today. Hopefully you guys will remember a teacher when you leave here that was important to you, and you'll see why we need to protect their jobs, why we need to make sure that they're still in the role that they should be in, and why we don't want to lose them. We don't want to lose them to technology. We want technology to unlock their superpowers so they stick around. So thank you.